All the things. All right, so today we're studying chapter 6, Judas Iscariot and the Naked Man, which is also a new show coming out on CBS next fall. No, it's not. You're like, really? I want to watch that. No. So my icebreaker for today is if everybody could go around, say their name, and which character in the Gospel of Mark, other than Jesus, has made the biggest impression on you and why? So just want to start with something really light on this cheery holiday. So which character, this is her question, not mine. Which character in the Gospel of Mark, other than Jesus, has made the biggest impression on you and why? Yeah, right. I've got my Bible. I know, but seriously, yeah. I know, because Mark's the one that has the fewest characters, right? Because it's all the sound bites and the fast verbs. And I'm like, oh, well, if it was the Gospel of Luke, then I would say Zechariah and Elizabeth, or, like all these. Matthew. Oh, good. All right, Susan.
Peter.
Peter.
It's for me, it's Peter. It's almost always Peter. Seriously. I mean, he's so impetuous and he wants to do everything right and he keeps messing up, but he comes out okay in the end.
Yeah.
So for me, it's
Well,
Peter. And all four of the Gospels, I'd have to say it's Peter.
Yeah, I don't know that he comes out okay in the end of Mark, but
I'm sorry?
I said I don't know that he does come out okay in the end of Mark, but
Yeah.
to be continued, right?
Yeah, we don't know about that.
Who else? Who's a character other than Jesus?
They're all looking at their books.
Oh, Cindy, who's your character?
Well, it's not one in particular, but the women
Yeah.
really kind of reach out because they really took a chance being so outspoken in their time because women were considered property. And I just think that the fact that they were actually even mentioned in any of the Gospels was probably divine intervention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good, thank you. All right.
I'm ML. It's nice to see you, Heather.
Nice to see you too, ML.
And I would say that for me, it's Peter also, but mainly because he's a doer and that's who I am. And so I can relate to him better than some of the ones who hesitate and sit back and wait. It's not my personality. That's not my personality. Yeah, even when you do it wrong, they're doing something.
I'd have to say the women.
So, Cindy. All right, anything other than what Cindy said? Cindy already said, okay.
Anybody over there? You.
All right.
Barbara.
Anyone else have any favorite Mark characters? Cupid was not in Mark, in case that's what you were looking for. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you to those of you who shared and those of you who are still researching. Feel free to chime in at any time. If we need to interrupt the video, oh, I've got it. Just go for it. But at this time, let's see here. Let's pray the opening prayer. Please join me. God of life and death, your beloved Son Jesus poured out his blood for many and was raised to new life. But too often we respond with betrayal, denial, fear, and silence. May your Spirit lift our minds and hearts to new understanding of and openness to the good news. May the time we spend with Mark's Gospel now make us better readers and especially better disciples, ready to go and tell the story of Jesus of Nazareth. Amen. All right, and now can we play the video, please? Thank you. It's interesting to me how she prays for us to go and tell the story of Jesus of Nazareth and all, and she's Jewish.
You're
Years ago, I saw the play Jesus Christ Superstar, and Judas in this jumpsuit was one of the most attractive actors I have ever seen. I kept thinking, why is he so interesting? And compared to Judas, Jesus wasn't that interesting. It may be that perhaps we are attracted to more edgy characters. Perhaps evil is more interesting than good. Perhaps the lack of clarity on Judas's motive and Judas's fate makes him of interest. So since then, I've been worrying a lot about Judas because his story changes as we go from gospel to gospel. Matthew tells us he was motivated by greed. I understand that. And Matthew's actually very much interested in rich people and in economics. The Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of John tell us that Judas was motivated by being possessed by Satan. I get that too. But Mark leaves us unsettled. We don't know why Judas betrays Jesus, and we don't know what happens to him either. According to Matthew, Judas hangs himself. Well, that's because David's betrayer, Ahithophel, hanged himself. And according to Luke in the book of Acts, he basically falls headlong and blows up. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know what motivated him. I don't know what to do with Judas. And I think Mark left Judas like that precisely to intrigue us. What do we want to happen to someone who betrayed Jesus? Is there hope for him? If all the disciples forsook Jesus and fled, and that's what Mark tells us, how is Judas any different? And if the other disciples can be redeemed, as we know they were from church history, what about Judas? Perhaps when we determine why Judas betrayed Jesus and what happened to him, we might not learn more about Judas. We might, in fact, learn more about ourselves. Whom do we condemn? How do we judge? What do we want to see happen? And might we be, in some sense, just as responsible and just as guilty? There's an old Italian proverb that basically means every translator is a traitor, because whenever we translate a word from one language to another, certain connotations drop out and other connotations drop in. Greek is actually a fairly consistent language, but even in Greek, words can mean different things. And here we have this Greek word, paradidomi. Para, from parallel or paradox, or indeed parable. It means to put something side by side. And didomi means to give. So if you put something side by side and you give, it can mean hand over, as one would hand over tradition. Paul hands over the tradition of what Jesus talked about in his Last Supper. But hand over, even in English, can also mean to betray. When Paul talks about the night that Jesus was handed over, Paul never mentions Judas. Jesus, according to Paul, is handed over by the foreknowledge and will of God. But when we get to the Gospels, we find Judas also engaged in what we might call paradidomeing, handing over or betraying Jesus. What did Judas actually do? Did he hand over Jesus with Jesus' willing acceptance because Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him? Or do we think of Judas as fully engaged in betrayal? Can you betray someone if the person actually knows you're going to do the action? How do we judge Judas? And if Jesus knows what Judas is going to do, is Jesus also somehow partially responsible for what happens to Judas? Mark does not make this easy for us. When we first meet Judas Iscariot in Mark's gospel, Mark makes it very clear. And Judas Iscariot, the one who paradidomied Jesus, the one who handed Jesus over or betrayed him. By the time we get up to the Gospel of John, not only is Judas possessed by Satan, Judas had been foreordained, predestined to betray Jesus, just as Jesus had been foreordained or predestined to die on the cross. So I wrestle with this. I don't think we have full free will. None of us does. because we can't control the circumstances under which we were born, or whether our bodies are healthy or diseased, or whether we came from wealth or poverty, or what our IQ is, or what our advantages or disadvantages would be. So to some extent, we're all controlled by what we might call fate. But I think to some extent, we all make our own lives. We can choose to do good. We can choose to do evil. We can choose to act for the benefit of others, and we can choose to be selfish and act only for our own benefit. I don't like the idea that Judas was somehow pre-programmed, any more than I like the idea that certain people are pre-programmed to be saved and others are programmed to be damned. I like the idea that while God is in control, we all have some sense of free will. And so I wrestle not only with the story of Judas, but I wrestled with the story of Jesus. Why did he not stop Judas, since he knew what Judas was going to do? Why did he not give the other apostles, the other disciples, an opportunity to have a conversation with Judas? Why not even say to Judas, what's your problem? What's bothering you? What is motivating you? Mark does not give us that opportunity. But even so, nothing stops us from asking. And because we don't know what motivated Judas, and because he was not stopped, we can all see ourselves not only as the apostles trying to figure out who Jesus is and trying to proclaim the gospel and trying to evangelize, and we can all in fact see ourselves as Jesus, who gives us the model of fighting the good fight and dying for a cause. But perhaps we can all see ourselves as Judas. What are we tempted to do that we should not do? Why do we do sometimes what we should not do when we know we should not do it? Can we be forgiven? And what, after doing something horrible, will our fate be? My insider students at Riverbend Maxim Security Institute will sometimes identify with Judas because they have done quite horrible things in their lives. But as they make it very clear, God forbid that we would be known by the worst thing we've ever done. Well, we remember Judas by the worst thing he did. What stories have not been told? What stories might be told? Mark leaves us unsettled. And I think that's a very good place to be, because once we become settled, we become complacent and we take things for granted and we don't deal with challenges. Mark says, you never really know if you're an insider and an outsider. You think you understand Jesus? Look again, dear friend. You think you understand everything in this gospel? Go back and read it again, and you will see things you did not see the first time, and read it a third time, and again you will see new things. The meaning of Mark is inexhaustible. Matthew and Luke, using Mark as a source, take away some of this difficulty. They tell us more about Jesus, so we don't have to guess so much. They make it more clear who's inside and who's outside. They clearly redeem the disciples at the end of the story. Matthew and Luke and even John want to make things more comfortable for us, and I think it was so smart when the people who put the New Testament canon together decided to include the Gospel of Mark. Yes, tucked in there between Matthew and Luke, but there nonetheless to keep us from being complacent, to think we know more than God does, to think we know everything. Mark says, you don't know everything, but your responsibility is to keep reading and to keep looking. That's why the end of the gospel with those frightened women running from the tomb is so powerful. Mark says, what I've given you can never be the end of the story. You have to engage with it. You have to find the next chapter. You have to figure out where your life intersects with the life of the gospel. And each time you think you've got it, go back and do it again. The challenge is worth it. And what we learn about the gospel, and what we learn about ourselves in reading the gospel, and what we learn about our neighbors who are reading with us, that's priceless. Mark opens the door. It's our job to walk through. For well over a millennium, people in the village of Oberammergau in Germany have been doing a passion play. Every 10 years they do this play. In the year 2010, I got to serve as a consultant, and again in 2020. The play was canceled because of COVID, and finally last year, I was able to see the play in production. And it changes every time it's done. So normally at the end of the play, we have the empty tomb and the resurrected Jesus appears, and the crowd shouts. But this year, this season at Ober Ammergau, all we have is Mary running from the tomb, and the tomb is empty. And at the end of this play, the audience, thousands of people, just sat there in silence. And then slowly we all got up and walked away. This was probably the most powerful ending, because what the director was suggesting is you find the resurrection on your own. You figure out what the next chapter is. You've seen what happened to Jesus, and you've heard his predictions about going before you to Galilee, about returning, about how the cross is not the end of the story, but you have to fill in the end on your own. If it's just a happy ending with a nice resurrection scene and maybe a breakfast, it's all good. But Mark, with this charged ending, was like the charged ending of the Ober Ammergau Passion Play. It makes you think. It makes you wonder. It makes you get up and move into real life, taking the story with you. And there are few things that are more powerful than taking the story with you and knowing that it's your responsibility to provide the next chapter or the next page.
All right. All right, any questions or comments from that video? Stood out to you? All right. Which, I was thinking that too. Yeah, I was like, okay, well, she doesn't even start on the naked boy yet. Oh, I guess we're done. I'll just finish this. Okay.
I think just reading through.
Oh,
I think just reading through Gospels, you don't come to the end of Mark and think, oh, well, get the same thing she's pointing out here. So I think that's interesting that, her take on why it ends abrupt and
oh,
except for the added on stuff.
right. Yeah, they have.
yeah.
We probably usually.
The added on part. Yeah. Yeah. So Susan was saying she hoped that we'd address or that she would address that part. So I don't know. Yeah, she really doesn't even in the book.
Yeah, the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have verses 9 through 20. Oh, it says that. So what we know Mark wrote ends, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. The end.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything that AJ said that really resonates with you? That's interesting about that festival or church in Germany. That would be a powerful way to end. Were there any other questions that this video segment raised for you?
Why did she talk so much in the book about the naked man?
Didn't mention it on there. I know. I know. She's possibly opening us up for a sequel or something. No. Okay. Well, so I have split the discussion questions into two parts. The first part is about Judas, and then the second part is about what she didn't talk about, the naked man. So if we can do split into groups and everybody has the same questions, discuss the part one questions that I gave you on Judas. And I do want to be conscious of people's time. So let's see if we can do that in 15 minutes. So that gets us at 10:40. 10:50. Yes, just one, actually go to 1050, because there's more questions on that one than the other one. Okay, Catherine, would you like to join Victoria and Cindy in their group? Okay, then we'll have 3 groups of 3 and 1 group of 4.
I didn't have a question. Well,
Oh,
okay, it's easier if you use it. If I just have to read them off the phone. and put them in that. Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay. Hello. All right.
I don't know, yeah. It says, do you think?
Actually, would you guys
Well,
mind
and you
if I
should have
put you
seen how,
guys in a breakout group so I can post the Sunday school video from?
That's fine.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Welcome back. So just before we discuss meant to read these before we had our discussion, but the biblical foundations for the Judas Iscariot part were, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray Jesus to them. When they heard it, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. That's Mark 14, 10 through 11. And then when it was evening, he came with the 12. And when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be distressed and to say to him one after another, "Surely not I." He said to them, "It is one of the 12 who is dipping bread into the bowl with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." This is the word of the Lord. All right. So what thoughts, comments did you have from your discussions with your groups? Judas.
You know, I think we would like it a lot better if it had been some like unnamed, just, hanger on disciple, not one of the 12 who had done this rather than one of the 12 that had been around him like all the time. But I mean, that's not what happens, but I'd like it better. I don't know about the rest of you.
Hey, thank you. Anyone else want to share anything they came up with during their discussions? Comments? Anybody from online? All right. Some provocative questions there. Anybody talk about how they wanted things to end with Judas? After Mark says, and then it ends, and okay, what'd you say? Yeah, thanks.
What the last question was it? We were hoping for redemption.
Yeah, that's what we talked about. For redemption for, can you
Judas.
tell us a little bit more?
Well, just kind of like the thief on the cross.
Uh-huh.
But we had a hard time. We had a hard time with Judas being predestined
Uh-huh.
to betray Jesus. On the other hand, if this was God's plan that he was going to be crucified to save mankind and somebody had to betray him, it might as well be Judas as anybody, I guess. But like you said, woe to Judas. So we're hoping for redemption because we've always read and learned that forgiveness is a key tenet of Christianity.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Well said. Anyone else?
Well, it would have been written about too, If Judas had come back to Jesus and confessed and said sorry, and was forgiven, that would have been written about. We would see that in the Gospels. Well, it could have been written and we don't have it, I guess. Yeah, I think it would be an all though if that would have happened. Yeah.
Okay.
We talked about the fact that, I mean, Judas had been with the 12. He's seen all he knew Jesus had all this power and everything.
Yeah.
And one of our postulations, if that's a good word, is that maybe he really was, and I think she alluded to this too, Amy Jill, that wanted Jesus to act
Mhm.
because he knew he could.
Yeah.
And that if he was kind of like a Maccabee in a way, maybe he wanted to see that power. And so he put him in a position where he'd have to use it,
Mhm.
but Jesus chose not to use it.
Mhm.
So maybe his motives weren't as evil as his portrayed in the gospel, all four gospels, actually. Well, not so much by Mark, maybe, but by the others. So, that's one of the things we talk about.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. Anyone else have anything that I wanted to share on that? Okay, Sandra. Okay.
So, but, if Jesus had been that kind of king, he would be tied to earth. He would be, he would have conquered earth, but he'd have to stay. He would really, right.
Right.
Yeah, he would not be a heavenly Jesus anymore. He'd have to stick with us here. Right.
And neither did any of the others.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we really understand it entirely, even now. 15. All right, thank you. Anyone else have anything they wanted to share? Yes. Tell me more about omniscience. Yes. Sure. I
I'm
think
just-
that's kind of the definition of it, isn't it?
I'm just saying, we're,
She just said, I don't know everything about omniscience.
we just talked about the fact that Jesus was omniscient, meaning that he knew all. And she even used that word in that section that she had us read, but, so the question was, do we think that he knew? Yes, we thought he knew because he knew all.
Right.
Well, he said he did at the Last Supper.
Yeah, he said he knew.
Well, we talked about when he might have known, that we weren't sure that he knew the whole time, because we're trying to talk about the difference between God the Son and God the Father, and how God the Father knows everything, but Jesus is fully human and fully God, and we still don't entirely get that, because we know there are some things that God the Father knows that God the Son doesn't, like when the second coming is going to be. And so when did Jesus realize that Judas was the one who was going to betray him, or did he always know it?
The garden in Gethsemane is where we find out what he knew when. Because his prayer was he knew he was going to have to take this cup.
Right.
Yeah.
He knew it then, but do we know how long ago he knew it before that? No, we just knew it by then he knew, right, yeah. By then he knew what the cup was. Yeah, by Last Supper, we know he knew it was Judas, but how long had he known before that? We don't know, as ML said, we are not omniscient. All right. Probably not. That's probably a lot of responsibility. All right, and then, so the other character this chapter is about that Ms. Levine did not mention during her video was that young naked man. So yes, from Mark chapter 14, verse 50. Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus when they seized him. He fled naked, leaving his garment behind. This is the word of the Lord. Can you imagine? I have never read any Bible study about that guy before. Never. I've been 3 a week for like 47 years. So that's a lot of Bible studies. And this is the first I've heard of this guy. Anybody else? All right. Well, then, why don't we go ahead and get back into those small groups for a little less time this time and do the questions part 2, which we just have, I think, 2 questions on there. So let's see here. It's 11 o'clock right now. Why don't we see if we can come back at 11:10? So just 10 minutes for those 2 questions. We should be able to do that, I would think. Okay. All right. Welcome back. You know, my husband said, are you just going to tell me to order something? I'm like, no, 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 that would be cheating. That would be part of it. Anywho, all right. So, anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share here about, what they talked about in their group about the naked guy? Okay.
What we have to give up or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good
First question about what or whom we need to give up to be disciples of Jesus, or what and whom we need to keep. I'll tell you that I said that the what I need to give up is this guy. And talked about how for years I've been struggling with the idea that was the Shema, that the first thing in the morning when you wake up, that God should be on your mind and you should be in prayer throughout the day and last thing before you go to bed. And yet, me, like so many of us, first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is check and see what happened while I was asleep throughout the day. Well, what's the weather going to be like? Well, what's the address for that? Well, let me see some more about that information all day long. Last thing before I go to bed. Okay. Right? I mean, really important things. Those of you online, Ellen asked, how old is Travis Kelce? Really important questions. And you know what? We did look that up this weekend. Apparently the same age as Taylor Swift. They're both born in 1989, in case you didn't look it up. Right. I mentioned that if we prayed half as often as we touched our phone, we'd really be following that.
Good point.
Okay, anyone else have anything that they need, something or someone that they need to give up to be a better disciple of Jesus? ML.
We talked about it.
No, but I was gonna share, I'll share what we talked. We talked about toxic people that were toxic to us, and that who's toxic to me may not be toxic to you,
Of course.
but that they definitely led us astray. And that we needed to be Barnabases for other people, that's who we needed to surround ourselves with, and that's who we needed to be.
All right.
And we talked about being careful what goes in, what we watch, what we read, what we listen to, those
Very-
kind of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So smart. Yeah. Oh, okay. Now, what was your name again?
Oh, that's who I am. Excellent. We said kind of the same thing, but we also said that, there's certain times in our lives where probably you can't be around that kind of person because you don't have enough of self-esteem or enough gumption or whatever, you need to be around that kind of person, and other times you can. And that's what's so hard on young people. And, because they're trying to fit in and trying to fit in and figure out where they go, in the world. So yeah, who they are. You can be, if you, and it's not.
Thank you. Anyone else? The second, the second question was about the connection between the young naked man who fled and the guy in the tomb. And Ellen had some very insightful information about this. Tell us what you said, Ellen.
I think it's BS.
I wanted to know how he got the robe back.
Yeah. Oh,
Right? He ran away naked because they were holding the robe, and then he's in the tomb with the robe on. But he didn't have an outer garment. How rich can you be?
He has his own emotional problems.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But it could have been an angel that ran, no, it wouldn't have been an angel that ran. I don't know. Okay, you're right. So let's see, in the beginning of this study, we asked, what is the good news? After reading this study, the whole book, what would you say the good news is according to Mark?
The resurrection, I think, is the point.
The resurrection, she
Yeah.
said.
You know, that's, he defeated death. We need to know that's possible.
Susan said he came, he saw, he conquered. Anyone else? What's the good news according to Mark? Jesus lived. Okay. Jesus died and Jesus lives again. Hallelujah. All right, that was from Susan. All right. Anyone else?
Part of the good news.
I think part of the good news from Mark is that we are part of the good, that our bearing good news is good news. Because the whole thing is, they went from the tomb and what? You know, it's like it doesn't say they ran and told everyone. And so it's like we're challenged to be the ones who are better than the guys that just went away from this tomb and went, oh, I don't know.
Or the
Yeah.
gals?
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
and we said, I think you said that, you know, it's like sometimes, you know, something hits you like that and you do leave, you know, like the women that left the tomb. It's like, you know, didn't the women go tell the disciples? And so it's like, you know, maybe they just needed to like
Process.
step back and process and before they could go tell them. You know, it's like, all right, you know, better do what you know, we were told to do.
All right. Thank you all. Okay, well, does anyone have any final thoughts on this entire study, the whole book, because it's over?
I don't like the mother-in-law sweaters. This is important.
This is not
This
important.
important.
Okay. Being funny, I just said I didn't like her mother-in-law. She did it.
Tell them who you are.
Did y'all hear that?
They can figure it out.
Yeah. They didn't hear it. Tell it, you just repeated.
Right.
Somebody.
She said that she didn't like the mother-in-law's sweaters that she knitted for Amy Jill. That's what she took away from the study. Anyone else? Anything else you took? Cindy, what did you take away from this study?
So I had some thoughts about AJ. And I discussed this with Victoria because I thought maybe y'all had talked a little bit more about her background at the first session because I wasn't there. So is she a Messianic Jew or is she, or you know, a non-Orthodox Jew going to a Jewish synagogue?
Not Messianic, I know that.
Okay. Because I just think it's very interesting because when the perspective that she writes from leads you to believe that she's a Christian.
Right.
The way she presents the stories leads you to believe that she's a Christian. And the other thing that was interesting was when the young man in her class was really sad about Jesus dying. She said, well, don't be sad because he's going to be, you know, born again or he's going to be resurrected.
Yeah.
So, you know, part of me felt like she's a college university professor and she is teaching a book study, like she is, you know, reading literature and they're studying a piece of literature and not really a Bible study. So I'm very confused on her whole persona and what her buy-in is to all this. Is she just a university professor with a point of view, but she's a non-Christian. I mean, you know, I mean, you know, she clearly states that she's Jewish a couple times.
Yes, a lot. Yeah. I actually
this-
asked
this is-
Victoria. Oh, sorry.
This is ML Cindy. I took Bible when I was in college in the 1950s. Okay, go back that far. It was taught as literature, not as a Bible study, even back then. I think that the way she's presenting it is exactly the way universities present the Bible.
Cindy,
Unfortunately.
I did ask Victoria several weeks ago if she was a Messianic Jew also. So you weren't the first one to ask Victoria that.
No, I was, yeah, I guess I was just confused. I thought maybe in the very first session that I missed, you all got some more description of her background, like in the video or something.
No.
Because I'm just a little bit, you know, like I know that there are university professors out there that do religious studies, and I was telling Victoria they present everything from the Quran, you know, to the Torah. I mean, it's everything, and but see, the opinions and the things that she gets out of scripture really puzzle me with her own beliefs, I guess.
Agreed. I thought the same thing with the prayers that she writes for us to pray during our Bible
Yeah.
study also.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, just the description on the back of the book says that AJ is the first Jew to teach New Testament at Rome's Pontifical Biblical Institute. It also says that she describes herself as an unorthodox member of an Orthodox synagogue and a Yankee Jewish feminist.
Yeah, that doesn't really answer my question, though. I read that several times because every time I read this book and I had a question about the way she presented something, I would look at it and say, it doesn't say anywhere where she's Messianic. So
No.
I didn't get it. But so why did we choose her to do this study if she's not a Christian? That's the other question I have. Not that I had a problem with her being Jewish. It's just that, did we want a non-Christian take on the gospel? I don't know.
So, yeah, this is maybe the third one that we've done of hers. Either the second or, and the idea of having a Jewish person teach, Jesus was a Jew. And so to get more clarity around the context of how it would have been understood in the time, it's really helpful to have a Jewish perspective. As to whether or not she is Christian, my sense is that she becomes more and more Christian the more she teaches this. Whether she would admit it or not, I mean, I sense belief in this. And it makes me think of my friend, I call her my favorite Jew besides Jesus, and that's Stacy Merlin, who is a chaplain at Parkland. And she was with us for our Seder meal many years ago, about 10 years ago. She went to Christ in the Desert Monastery with me, you know. She is quite Christian. But and I asked her if she wanted to be baptized there. She goes, I think that's going a little too far right now. But she's very Christian. You know, I mean, it's Jesus is more to her than a Jew or a prophet. And so I kind of sense the same thing with Amy Jill Levine. It's like he's rubbing off on her.
Yeah. Well, and I do enjoy her books. I read another one of her books in another Bible study also, and I really enjoy the Jewish perspective on bringing in a lot of the Old Testament and what the Jews believe when we read the New Testament.
Well, AJ has moved from being Orthodox to an unorthodox in an Orthodox congregation. So she may still be moving.
Right. All right. Well, AJ encourages us to continue reading and rereading Mark. And let's see here. And each time we pass through the gospel, it is not the same, for we are not the same. Each time we are confronted with new mysteries and challenges, each time we find partial answers and temporary comfort. So I thought that was a way to finish that. And so at this point, I would like to ask for prayer requests. So Cynthia,